Okay, good afternoon, Las Vegas. It's nice that everybody's here. I'd ask the panelists to please come on up, and we will begin. There are three items that we want to cover today. The first is probably the most difficult, and perhaps the least that we can solve. The other stuff is really good news, and it's nice to have some good news about things that are happening in fair trade. And I'm actually very excited about the fact that the new standards for fair trade gold have been transferred and afloat and armed, and I guess now they're armed and dangerous. But that's a wonderful, wonderful piece of news, and I'm so delighted that there's an opportunity. I know that in our conference in Basel, they were also very happy to announce it, and now we will get more information. And then the issue about ethical sourcing from Ashton Carter will be here. So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss a number of issues, and we'll try to have a lot of panel and other discussions. This isn't going to be your standard, this is what we're telling you. We want people to participate and even draw closer if you could. First of all, why don't we introduce our panel members? So why don't we start with Noura?
Go ahead and introduce myself?
Sure.
Okay. Noura Jamshir from the Experts in Diamonds from the UN Group of Experts on Côte d'Ivoire.
So you work at the United Nations?
That's right.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Michael Ray. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Responsible Jewellery Council.
And previously the World Wildlife Foundation.
Yes.
Dealing with wild animals.
I didn't do critters.
No, but you're protecting. But that was for industry policy. Okay, great.
Hello, my name is John Hall. I'm Head of External Affairs for Rio Tinto, and I'm also Vice Chairman of the Responsible Jewellery Council.
Okay.
Hi everyone, my name's Toby Pomeroy. I am a jewelry designer manufacturer at Toby Pomeroy Company, and also as of the last month, newest board member for ARM, Alliance for Responsible Mining.
Hi, my name is Maya Spall. I'm Director of Innovation at Transfair USA, and we certify fair trade products. You've probably seen our label on coffee and various food items, and we are moving into non-food such as gold and clothing and all sorts of other exciting things. So I'm here to talk about that.
Okay, great. So we're going to knock this into three areas, and the first issue that I'd like to bring up is the most difficult one, which is this whole issue of Zimbabwe and Meringue. We'll give it a good few minutes, and I want everybody to feel free to comment and talk, not just the panel members. I'll give a little bit of a background. The latest report that I have on this is something that they got on Friday, about some 600,000 carats of diamonds coming out. But let me first explain at least what I think the situation is. And by the way, John, I know that Rio Tinto's got something going there, so correct me if I'm wrong. Okay? Just some background. The situation in Zimbabwe became well known and complicated in about September, October of 2008 amid reports that the Zimbabwean military, using helicopter gunships and dogs and other means, and the local militia, literally killed about 225 people, according to reports by Human Rights Watch. The discovery or the development of artisanal diamonds, which are basically diamonds that are coming from alluvial sources, so they're not like a deep diamond mine that you would normally dig, but the diamonds are scattered from ancient volcanic riverbeds. Those diamonds were found to be plentiful, and what happened was that there were diggers that were digging for these diamonds, and then the military decided to take over the area, and people were killed. There's also continuous reports, even until today. I mean, I spoke to some people as early as last week, of enforced slavery. People who have been working in that area have been forced to work, and rape of women on a regular basis who are in the area. And the human rights abuses, at least according to Human Rights Watch, has been continuous. The question is, what do we do about these diamonds? The Kimberley process has been designed to deal with very difficult situations of rebel movements. It was created in relation, one of the issues was the Sierra Leone war, and which I believe that the Kimberley process had a role in stopping. And the idea then was that basically we would not have situations where rebel movements would attack governments using the local natural resources to fund the rebel movement. However, and this I may be wrong, and you guys can correct me, but my understanding of the Kimberley process and the definition of conflict diamonds is that it does not include human rights abuses. Matter of fact, I participated in discussions at Kimberley. I was actually at the first Kimberley meeting and many subsequent ones where, in fact, the government did not want human rights to be incorporated because of fears of all kinds of political and other interests blockading countries' diamonds. So we're in a situation today where the Kimberley process doesn't really resolve the issue, although there's efforts to broaden the scope of the Kimberley process. And we have an issue where we have these diamonds that are coming out, some with Kimberley process certificates, some without, some being smuggled through Mozambique, then into the Congo, and then into Belgium or UAE, or directly in some instances, I think, to India. And so we have these blood diamonds, and I'm defining blood diamonds as diamonds relating to murder, slavery, and rape. So I'm not talking about environmental damage here. And these diamonds somehow have gotten into the diamond industry. And the question is, what can we do about it? Should we do anything about it? And what can be done? And so that's the question that I put before the group. I know, Noura, in your past, you were the diamond controller of the UAE, and I know that there were at least 3 shipments sent to the UAE. I'm not really interested in your work in the Ivory Coast right now. What I'm interested in is what's going on here in terms of what you know. Is it possible to stop the flow of these blood diamonds?
Interesting question, Martin, but definitely something worth discussing. Is it possible to flow? From my experience, definitely not. There is no way, from my experience, what I've seen is that governments have not enacted, even the Kimberley process did not have enough tools to stop the flow of conflict diamonds, whether we're talking about Ivory Coast, whether we're talking about Sierra Leone, or if we're talking about Zimbabwe diamonds. One of the issues that we've spoken about is, first of all, you need the tools. And this is what, if you go to any government, they would tell you, oh, we don't have the tools, we don't have the rights, and a whole list of reasons. The first tool is basically, how can you tell a diamond that is of Zimbabwe origin or merengue origin from those that are not? And then, you know, we know that there's a footprint. You can easily identify, I'm talking about now Zimbabwe, you can easily identify merengue diamonds. But then, in reality, you go to a particular country, you would tell them, oh, you guys, you had suspicions, you should have done something. Well, they would answer back and say, oh, well, there are no sanctions, and, you know, they would give you a whole list of reasons. So my guess is that there is a certain degree of lack of political will. There is an absence of tools to even enable countries to prevent conflict diamonds from entering their systems. And let's face it, the trade is 2 steps probably ahead of the Kimberley process. I mean, from what we've seen on the ground is that the trade has adjusted to the Kimberley process. In fact, I think it came as a blessing because right now a lot of non-conflict diamonds, are entering the Kimberley process, either at the mining origin or at the points of the international trading centers. So this is the reality. And
so is it fair to say that the diamond and jewelry industry at this stage cannot rely on governments to ensure that blood diamonds are not penetrating the trade?
What I would suggest...
I'm open to discussions. Is that a fair statement?
I would think the best system has to be a marriage between both. It has to be government and it has to be industry. Governments are limited. They have, you know, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the integrity of the trade, integrity of the people that are buying the diamonds. And from my experience, this is where the issue is. I mean, I met a lot of, and I wouldn't want to say the names, but I met a lot of traders who have said, listen, I don't care. As long as it comes with the Kimberley certificate, that's all that that's all that I care
My point is something. Bottom line, let's assume you're a jeweler, and you'd like to make sure that the diamonds that you sell are not blood diamonds. I'm using conflict diamonds because conflict diamonds is a very narrow definition. I like to make sure they're not meringue diamonds, put it that way. I don't think that we have the tools right now if we rely on governments.
No, absolutely
So
not.
the question then is, first, is that true? I throw that at you. And if it is true, is there anything that the trade can do, maybe the Responsible Jewelry Council, maybe other ways, to protect itself from being in a situation where we resell and distribute these blood diamonds? And so that's open. I'm not attacking here. The question is there anything we can actually do? So.
Martin, it's a very fair question. I think the first thing I would say is that no international system is ever, I think, going to be perfect, and so to suggest that any of them can be is really to set them up to fail. So, if you begin from accepting the fact that 100% achievement is almost certainly impossible, but that's what you would aim for, then that's a good place to start. The second thing I would say is that the KP is not a multi-stakeholder body for nothing. I mean, it includes industry and it includes civil society, and that's right because, again, it needs to be the responsibility of all players in the industry. I mean, after all, the reason why there's a market for blood diamonds is because people buy them. So there are various chains of supply, as we know. So it can't only be the responsibility of government. It is, like the reputation of the industry overall, a shared responsibility for all parts of the industry. That might seem trite, but I think it's true.
The idea here is that the jeweler is ultimately responsible for what he sells the consumer. So if a jeweler sells a synthetic diamond to a consumer without disclosure, he's responsible. If he sells a stolen diamond, someone shot a jeweler in Las Vegas and he sold that diamond, he's responsible. So I think that the responsibility here is not really with the governments of Africa or someone, it's responsibility of the idea is that you're responsible for what you buy, you're responsible for what you sell. So we as a trade have a responsibility, or not to deal in diamonds. By the way, there's a solution. Don't sell diamonds. With all due sincerity. Just don't sell them. Because if you sell them and you get your store painted with red paint by some NGO, maybe you won't be able to sell gold or silver or anything else. But I know that it may sound extreme to you, but the bottom line is, if you want to be a moral and ethical person, what can you do to defend your position as someone who's, I mean, if you say, I don't know, maybe it's blood diamond, maybe it's not because of governments, I don't know, and that's what I'm selling you when you're engaged in ring, I just don't know. Telling you the truth, I think for a lot of consumers, that may not fly. So, the RJC, for example, is talking about auditing how diamonds are flowing and auditors and stuff, right? So is there a way that the diamond and jewelry industry can protect itself using other things that have nothing to do with governments, nothing to do with the Kimberley process, okay, that protects itself from this thing? Because I don't think a jeweler who has a good name and reputation and who sells a lot of things besides diamonds wants to look at his customer and say, I don't know. And I don't think today he does know. So do we have anything in this industry that can protect us?
I think the fundamental issue is, as you say, Martin, it's going to be a question around, do you know what you're selling? Do you know who you buy from? And do you know where they get it from in the first place? And how do you credibly know that? At the moment, you could take the issue of saying, well, until I know 100%, I won't deal in diamonds. Now, there are a lot of people in these buildings would be horror-struck at that prospect, given the nature of the issues that we're dealing with. It's why, for the Responsible Jewelry Council, we looked first at defining what constitutes responsible practices at every step in the supply chain, from mining through to retail. It's why we have been working very strongly with the likes of the Association for Responsible Mining and DDI, the Diamond Development Initiative, around developing up similar standards around how do you responsibly produce artisanal, small-scale mining gold and diamonds. What we're now turning our attention to is the whole question of chain of custody. We figured this was the right order of business in which to approach these issues. Looking first and foremost is how do you know whether a practice is responsible, and then, in effect, is it possible to join the dots within the supply chain such that at every point in the supply chain people know in fact what it is they're dealing with. Now there are a number of ways you can approach this issue, and that's the challenge, the work that we're undergoing over this year, is to look at what is the nature of a credible claim around chain of custody. It can be quite specific. I know exactly where this gold came from in this wedding band. I know exactly where this diamond came from in this solitaire for an engagement ring. But it can be other things, and there are many other examples that are credible claims in markets around issues of, I know what it isn't. I can tell you what it's not. I can tell you that it is not a Zimbabwean stone because of these initiatives that are being undertaken by my supply chain that have been credibly attested to by independent third-party audit. Those are the sorts of issues that I think the industry has got to grapple with to have the tools to be able to answer these questions. And that's, in effect, the R&D that we're doing now around the issue of chain of custody, such that it provides an option for our members. Now, one thing I'd just like to state very plainly before this audience, antitrust rules means that the RJC cannot, will not, say that its members must only trade each with each other. That's a go to jail moment. So that's not on the table. What's being talked about are what are feasible options available to the RJC, its membership, and more broadly to the jewellery industry to look at their chain of custody and make credible claims. You were saying before, Martin, taking stolen goods, is the jeweller responsible? Well, yes, if they have no reasonable excuse as to why they are handling this. You know, someone comes in with a mask and a sack marked loot and gives it to you and you go, oh great, and then sell it. Well, of course, you are going to be sprung for it, and rightly so. The issue for us is around what is the basis upon which credible claims can be made. Because any number of people can make any number of claims based on nothing more than a wing and a prayer and crossed fingers. You know, saying to people, I don't want to buy Zimbabwean diamonds and I want a letter from you that says that you're not selling them from Marangi, well, that's one level of evidence, but you're reliant upon the goodwill and the integrity of the person signing the letter promising you that they're not going to do that anymore, or that they're not going to do it at all if they ever did it before. Now, that's a form of evidence, but how credible is it? Is moot. And that's the real difficulty, I think, that we face, as many other industries have faced, trying to put together credible chain of custody claims.
I think this chain of custody is a very exciting idea. And I think we're going to end up, as we move to the next direction, to start talking with Flo about the great work they're doing with fair trade. But let's go further with this. Let's assume for a minute that we could point to chain of custody scenarios like for mining companies. Say De Beers has got the Forever mark or the Canada mark or some other marks where we know that the diamonds are coming from known sources that are legitimate. And maybe they're even mixed and commingled in that pot once we know where it's coming from. Sort of like a kosher kitchen. If all the food coming in is kosher, all the dishes going out, and you don't really care who the cook is. So assuming that we could have chain of custody for certain types of diamonds that are, you know, known to come from good sources, okay? And there would be some way to be able to audit the transference of those diamonds from rough to polished to jewelry. I think that might be a reasonable solution. Is that?
Well, there are ways to do that, and it's already been done.
So basically what we're saying is there might be a solution here using the chain of custody. And once we get it up and running.
It's part of the solution, yes, I think is the answer to that.
Okay. Now, the only problem that I have then is the unintended consequences of what will this do to the artisanal diggers. And first of all, I think it's a good idea, by the way. I think it's great. But anybody out there who's got any other views, you know, we're all open. But let's assume for a minute we get some kind of chain of custody scenario going so we know the diamonds, and it's a trade scenario. It's not a government scenario. So the trade is saying this is kosher, and it's coming from these mines, which we know, known source. I could say what it's not, like you explained it. Okay. Now the question becomes, okay, this is good. What are the unintended consequences? One unintended consequence is you might have diamonds from Sierra Leone or the Congo or other places from artisanal sectors, which can't be traced because they don't have a chain of custody from the mine because they're alluvial and they're coming from artisanal diggers. And then these people are effectively excluded from this. I think they would be excluded. Again, I'm not complaining.
No, again,
Yeah,
Martin, I think
yeah.
the issue, that's where the synergies and the discussions, if you like, the symbiotic relationship between the likes of RJC, ARM and DDI are so critical, because the last thing either of those entities want, or any of those entities want, is this notion that there is only one group of companies or entities, artisanal diggers, whatever, who can contribute good, responsible material into a responsible sourcing system around a chain of custody. So I think it's a false premise at the moment around that. Will there be unintended consequences for people outside of ARM, DDI, RJC? Yes, that could well be it. But at the moment, in terms of the dialogue going on between our institutions, it won't be that ARM and DDI are left out of what we're looking at within chain of custody work for RJC. In fact, far from it.
So there's an effort that's going to take place to ensure that there is inclusiveness
Indeed.
in terms of. But I do want to point out the situation in Africa is not one which easily lends itself to any assurance as to where the diamond's going. You want to say something?
Sorry, I just wanted to add something. I mean, I wanted to say, artisanal or let's say alluvial sources do not have to be excluded from the whole process. I'll just give you a simple example of what's happening in Liberia. Most of the diamond fields are alluvial deposits, but what the system in place enables the end user, or let's say the exporter, to find out exactly the exact location where the diamonds were mined. So they have a very good chain of custody system, and you can pinpoint exact. I mean, again, the exact GPS coordinates. Now, Liberia, to my knowledge, is the only country that has this stringent chain of custody system. It's not available in Ghana. It's not available. I'm not sure.
Could be made available.
Yeah, could be made
There are
available.
solutions.
Yeah.
There are solutions that we might pursue. One other question. What happens to the cutters? Say in India, in Surat, you have hundreds of thousands of cutters. Is it possible to trace the rough to the polished? He made a parcel of rough, and then they made a parcel of polished, and then they sorted out all the goods for tennis bracelets. And is there any way that the chain of custody can be inclusive enough to allow for the ways in which the diamonds are sorted, and selected, and resorted and cut?
I think in principle, yes, but it's not necessarily easy.
Is it doable?
I think it's certainly doable, Martin, and as we'll hear from the fair trade folk, this has been done for a whole raft of different commodities. Most, a lot less valuable than gold and diamonds. So the interest in tracing things like coffee, important as it is, don't get me wrong, but it's nowhere near as inherently valuable as a similar bag full of rough, let alone a similar bag full of polished in terms of weight. So yes, it can be done. Is it completely foolproof? Will you never have someone trying to defraud such a system? No. Tragically, fools and crooks are always with us. So the system has to guard against that as best it can. And again, that's what comes back to the work that we're doing around establishing what is the nature of the credible claim that can be made. We're not looking about setting up a tracking system for materials. Others do that exceptionally well. What we're looking at for the purposes of the RJC is what tracking systems are there out there making what sorts of ultimate claims at retail level, and therefore what are the credible ones that we would see meeting these standards. Therefore we can have faith that they are in fact presenting the consumer with honest information as to what the material is or isn't. And it may well be that it's blended. The material that is in this tennis bracelet, for example, I'm not going to tell you, I cannot tell you where each and every one of those individual small diamonds comes from. However, I do know through my tracking system for chain of custody that it has come from amongst these sources, which we know to be responsible.
Great. So there's something, essentially what I'm getting out of this is that there's something, it may take some time. It's not going to be 100% foolproof because there's always going to be ways to try to circumvent the system. but it's not going to be like a boat with a 60-foot hole in it either.
One would hope not.
Yeah, so what's going to happen, there are things that the trade can do, independent of governments, that would allow the trade to segregate out reasonably well situations like the Merengue diamond thing. And that the RJC is attempting to bring a consensus together of people and ideas and systems and to kind of make this happen. And that this might be a longer, it'll take a while, but this might be a solution to the Merengue or the blood diamond kind of problems. Right? That's what we're getting out of this?
That's certainly what we're intending to try to do, Martin. The issue is we have an incredibly complex supply chain that we're trying to deal with here. And unfortunately, we were told we couldn't have slides, so spare me as I try to explain what this enormously complicated flow diagram looks like. But we end up with a bracelet, tennis bracelet, if you like to use that as the particular example. It contains materials from a multiplicity of places. Not just the diamonds could each come from as many different mines as there are currently on Earth, because of course they're assembled these days not on the basis of that they have come from a particular mine, more that they are a particular physical dimension. They are of the same size, shape, clarity, etc., etc., etc. The metals in that bracelet could also come from a multiplicity of places. The gold could come from multiplicity of mines, not only in real time now, but also by virtue of recycled gold. You could have some of the stuff in there that come from the conquistadors, just simply because this material is quite rightly and wonderfully, eminently recyclable and recycled. So it is quite an incredible supply chain process that we're trying to deal with here. Now, not dissimilar to some of the challenges that others have faced in certification systems elsewhere, notably in paper production, because of course paper has the same sorts of issues. They have successfully dealt with it, that is the industry, the NGO community, in trying to look at what happens with recycled paper. Because if you want to take a jaundiced view, you can say that recycled paper is laundered. It could be the most incredibly terrible paper that went into the mix to create the recycled paper. So these are the sorts of intellectual efforts that are needed to be going through for this industry to come out with credible claims to the consumer at the end. This is not a simple, you chop the tree down, here is a piece of lumber and here is the table. It is not that straightforward. It is similar, though, to paper, because paper comes from various sources into a paper mill, it goes into an enormous blender process, and out it comes at the other end. Now, whilst the comparison, some in this room may not like to compare gold and diamond jewellery with recycled paper, but it does share a lot of commonalities. And we need to learn from those experiences as to how we make credible claims as to chain of custody.
In the information services industry, they have GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. Here would be good stuff in, good stuff out. And that would be weird. Now, is there any, I'd like to move on to, so look, there looks like there's any idea in a timeline of, because right now we got this Merengue problem, and is there any short-term solutions that you guys would have, anybody here would have?
Well, the basic short-term solution is, as organisations like the RJC, as Jewellers of America, have written to their members urging them to be incredibly cautious in working with their customers to guard against this. Your
suppliers, not customers.
Sorry, their suppliers, about where this material has come from. Your organisation has written to its traders saying, look, we do not want you trading in this stuff. Now, the best you can do, and this is no criticism, you've got a letter from them saying that we will not be dealing in this. But that's as far as you can go until somebody shows you evidence that somebody has broken their word and are doing it. Now, that is, at the moment, basically what the industry has to do. It has to know its supplier, it has to demand of the supplier an assurance that this material does not constitute the goods that are traded to them. That's essentially the limit that we can go to at the moment. If anyone's got a better idea.
One aspect that I would offer as well is that I think educating our consumers, our customers, that they start asking when they really are interested. That's going to put pressure all the way down the line. And while that's not an immediate solution, I think that's ultimately going to that's the biggest kind of pressure that will make change the most rapidly.
Are you educating the consumer, the retailer?
All of them. Yeah.
Let it out.
Yep.
Good idea. Anybody else? Oh, you want to say something? Cecilia, you want to say something?
If I may.
Please.
Thank you. I apologize for being late. I was in another meeting. I just wanted to say a couple things. Right now, if consumers were to ask retailers the origin of their diamonds, most retailers would not be in a position to answer that question. So it's almost unfair to urge consumers to ask that question, because it's a question that really cannot legitimately be answered at this point. I mean, when we have completed chain of custody systems such as are being proposed here, then perhaps retailers would be in a position. But I really hate to endanger retailers at this stage by setting them up, by urging consumers to ask a question which they, without any fault of their own, are unable to answer. So that would be my first point. Secondly, I think there are other organizations besides the RJC, besides the Rappaport Trading Network, besides JA, that have insisted that their members refrain from trading in Maranghi diamonds. And I just want to add that those organizations, despite some criticism I heard this secondhand because I wasn't here, about those organizations, they have done, I think, long and credible work to ensure that their members, first of all, are kept up to date on the circumstances pertaining to the views on Maranghi diamonds and the situation in Zimbabwe. And they have made, some of them even, a condition of membership to refrain from trading in Maranghi diamonds. And these are the organizations that have as their members the level of trade that would see these diamonds. And the alerts have been going out internationally through the Kimberley process with attached pictures and footprints of Maranghi diamonds, so that trading companies, countries, trading governments who see these diamonds coming in across their borders are aware of what the Maranghi diamonds look like. The organizations such as the World Diamond Council, such as the World Federation of Bourses, such as the International Diamond Manufacturers Association, have made it very clear that they seek to insist that their members not trade in these diamonds. And then the international alerts that have been going out to the participating governments within the Kimberley process have been repeatedly urged to enhance their vigilance pertaining to the Maranghi diamonds, and have repeatedly been shown what the Maranghi diamonds look like. Now, like any other system, these systems are not perfect, but there are always going to be missed opportunities, and there are going to be bad actors. I promise you that the business in which I have devoted my professional attention, both as a former prosecutor and now as part of the Jewelers Vigilance Committee, both of those organizations for whom I have worked professionally my entire professional career have never run out of business. That's because there are always bad actors. And I wish that they did run out of business, and we all wish that they ran out of business. But the bottom line is there are always going to be people operating in the margins. It's our responsibility to identify those people, to make sure that we know who they are and that we do not trade them, and when it's appropriate we report them to the various authorities. But it is the Kimberley process that was able to publish the footprint of the Maranghi diamonds, to seek through government intervention enhanced vigilance pertaining to the trade in Maranghi diamonds. And it is the organizations such as the World Diamond Council, the World Federation of Diamond Bourses, the International Diamond Manufacturers Association, and the RJC, and the Jewelers of America, and other credible and hardworking jewelry associations who are well-meaning, who want to see these problems stop, who are doing the hard day-to-day work to make sure that the trade in Maranghi diamonds does not allow for the continued human rights violations in that area. So there is no one person, there isn't no one platform, there is no one organization who can make this happen. It is a combined effort in a complex trading circumstance to make sure that the bad diamonds don't get traded. And I think it's very easy to say that the Maranghi diamonds are the bad diamonds. Are there going to be bad guys trying to work the margins? Of course. But these efforts are ongoing. The situation is complicated, and accusations that organizations are unable to cope just seem to be, to me, counterproductive.
Thank you. So, I think it's important for Cecilia to be able to say what she said. And I'm the guy who made the statement today that I didn't trust these organizations when it came to Maranghi diamonds. But in any case, the point is that we could enter into a real strong debate here. But my position on this is that you're beating a dead horse here, Cecilia. The Kimberley process does not, in fact, stop Maranghi diamonds from entering into India where they're cut. Blood diamonds have, in fact, entered into the system. And the Jewelers Vigilance Committee, World Federation of Diamond Boards, RJC, and everybody else has not alerted their members not to rely on the Kimberley process in a clear manner. So that's what this is. But I think we want to move on. And my goal here isn't to enter into a vociferous debate as to whether or not the diamond industry is doing what it can today. If, in fact, blood diamonds are in stores, which I believe they are, that can be...
Yeah. How can you say... basically make a slur against it, but I don't want to go on with that, so let's move on. Well,
we can discuss it if you want. I didn't bring up this issue, Cecilia did. So
well,
I said,
actually, it's your forum, so you get to say whatever you want, and other people don't get to engage. That's
you can
just
get
fine.
emotional, it's fine. I think it's healthy. But
I shouldn't get emotional?
No, I'm saying you can.
I understand you were rather emotional.
No, but it's good. I think this is, well, let's have an open discussion then. And the question is very straightforward. Have diamonds from Maranghi been exported and entered the diamond industry with Kimberley process certificates? A yes or no works fine for me. One second. I'd like to ask the question. And if it's okay, if it happened, it's all right. It's at the end of the world.
The point that you've just made a moment ago, Martin, was that we have not expressed sufficiently the various organisations the warnings are clear to people that they should be guarding very carefully their suppliers to ensure this material is not there. Now, all those institutions have said that. So it is, I think, grossly unfair and extraordinarily misleading to somehow imply, if not state blatantly, that these institutions are in some sense remiss in their activity on this issue. What we're talking about is, yes, there are issues that need to be resolved, as Cecilia has said quite eloquently. This is a task for everyone in this industry to ensure that these diamonds, these bad guys, are kept out of the mix. There are going to be a variety of ways and means that we can do this, and all these institutions, WFDB, IDMA, RJC, JA, GVC, etc., have been on song on this together as to why our members need to be at their guard on these issues. So to imply otherwise is just farcical.
I'm terribly sorry, but the standards, if you go onto your website, of the RJC and the press releases issued by the World Diamond Council said very clearly, as long as the Kimberley process is your standard. Now, if you take a look at the press release by the World Diamond Council, and I did point to that, it said, and I guess I can quote it for you, if you have the Kimberley process certificate, that is, then you know the diamonds are okay. And I pointed that out at the time, and I never heard any response. So all I'm saying is, we're all on the same team. I'm not questioning anyone's integrity in the sense that we all would like it to happen. I am, however, questioning an infatuation, a misplaced reliance on the Kimberley process. I know you may want to make it better, which is fine, and the miscommunication to the industry that you can rely on the Kimberley process to ensure that your diamonds are okay, when in fact that's not true. That's my concern. And I don't mind people saying, look, we have a problem, we have to work together to resolve it, that's fine. I just want people to know that they can't rely on this specific device to solve this problem right now, and that we should keep our eyes in the future to find good ways to work. I'm not against finding the right ways to work to the future, but it is misleading, as you would say, terribly misleading for the diamond industry, and I'm telling you that the view of the diamond industry by and large is, as long as you have a Kimberley process certificate, you're okay. And in my view, that has been propagated by the organizations, and it's never been rescinded in a clear manner. So what I'm asking for is, let's just tell the people to be careful, and not just be careful, but they shouldn't rely on something that they shouldn't rely on. And that's my concern, that there's that miscommunication in the industry. And I apologize if I'm not the nicest guy in the world, but I do think that we need to communicate to the trade, do not rely on the Kimberley process right now until it can get fixed or until another system is in place. That's my view. And everyone's entitled to different views on it. Well, we can pick it up.
10 years ago, you said the best thing that the Kimberley process could do when you were in Melbourne was to make clean diamonds worth more than dirty diamonds. And I think to some extent that has probably been effective. But to Julia, Cecilia, we haven't been hearing in the press about all of those wonderful organisations actually catching diamonds at borders and putting people in jail. Have there been diamonds impounded?
There have been numerous seizures of diamonds. I only know about the seizures of diamonds in the United States. And of course, the WFTB doesn't seize them.
Have there been
Customs
Marangi
seizes.
diamonds seized?
Yes, there have been Marangi diamonds seized as well.
Why isn't this publicised?
Each country has its own regimen, its own rules about publishing or not the criminal investigations and the steps that they take in connection with seizures at customs. I know the U.S. does not publish information about the seizure of diamonds or anything else at the border.
Well, isn't that sad? Wouldn't it be good if people...
Speak to your congressman. That is not the result or the work of the industry associations. That is a government policy. And by the way, the industry's organizations don't seize diamonds. Governments seize diamonds. So, you know, let's be very clear who we're looking at for responsibility here. But there have been numerous seizures of diamonds on borders, and specifically Marangi diamonds. There have also been seizures there.
The only instance that I know about is and it was in the press in India. They arrested people in Surat for trading these diamonds.
That's not the only one I read about.
Yeah. So okay, if there's more, that's fine, and we should let people know. And if it's public, it's great. And I think that they're trying to do the best that they can.
Well, I'd ask you all to do that too, so that we in the trade know about it.
Okay.
There have been published reports in the trade magazines about numerous seizures of Marangi
more
diamonds.
to do with people smuggling money rather than...
Diamonds.
I know,
diamonds.
but using diamonds as a way of smuggling money from one country to another and so on. Not so much conflict diamonds. And what we're talking about is conflict diamonds.
Okay. We've agreed to disagree on some issues here. Are there any other questions about this subject particularly?
Martin, with all due respect, I think it's very, very unfair to come with such harsh criticism against the industry, against the organizations like WDC, World Federation, IDBA, and so on and so forth. I think that you know very, very well that everything that the organizations can do, they are doing. You know, there is a part, like Cecilia said, and rightly so, that is the government's part, which we cannot interfere, and the governments are doing their share. But the organizations, since the beginning, have done everything which is in their capacity. And I think that you know it very well. The mere fact is that when we started the whole thing a couple of years ago, there were at least 4 or 5% of diamonds were unquestionable, right? Today, I doubt if it comes to 0.5%. I think it's less than that. And without the cooperation of the industry, you couldn't have been there. And you know it very well. So I think sometimes you can give some compliments to the industry. You said, okay, bravo, you did your share, you are doing your share. Of course, there are some weak points. We cannot do everything. It's impossible, we all know. But we can do our utmost. And the industry, including all the leading organizations, is doing it utmost. And I think, Martin, I think that you are aware, you've been so many years involved in activities, you know what has been done and what is the capacity. So I think it's, to put it carefully, I think it's a little bit unfair to come with such a harsh criticism against the organizations. Thank you.
Let me say that I appreciate what you're saying, and I think that perhaps it is unfair. But my point here, and I think we made it at the World Federation meetings as well, where I literally pleaded with people on the Marangi issue, is that the industry has responsibility that transcends governments. The industry, as a jeweler, as a wholesaler, has responsibility, moral, ethical, and perhaps even legal, to take actions to prevent the distribution of these diamonds above and beyond what governments can, will, or won't do. And perhaps this is a point of disagreement with the industry organizations. And I guess I have a different view sometimes, which is not the first time, okay? And that's my view. And I guess that I may be castigated for not being kind to a lot of volunteer efforts that people are doing. They're trying to do the right thing. And I always say that the road to hell sometimes is paved with good intentions, mine as well. And so that's where it is. But my point very firmly and strongly is that we cannot rely on governments to keep our industry correct, and we have that responsibility. But, you know, I think that it can be debated, and I respect other people's views and rights to do what they think, as well as I respect my own right to express them, and I am an extremist in some instances, particularly here. But I think what we should do is move along as well. I mean, we'll take that point, and then I think we should move along to some of the more positive aspects of what's going on.
Just a general question, and I'm from the colored stone industry, so I'm not up on all the diamond issues, but has Zimbabwe been removed from the KP system?
They suspended themselves.
And why is it that all these people that tell me you're doing everything that you can, you don't suspend them and you wait until they have to suspend themselves? That would be embarrassing if I was in that position.
There is a due process system within the Kimberley process system that is fair and is admittedly laborious and complicated.
Well, admittedly laborious while people are dying seems a little bit odd to me.
The suspension of Zimbabwe from the Kimberley process will not stop what's going on in the Morangi fields. I promise you it will make it worse.
It may well be, but all you people that are saying how the industry is doing everything that they can, I have a difficult time putting a lot of credibility in that when you're not even willing to suspend someone who's the greatest violator.
Well, then maybe you and I can sit down and I can take you through the complexities here.
Okay, I think it's a good idea. Hang on. What we need to do is this. We need to move on and get to some good news, too. I'm definitely not shying away from additional debate on the subject, and I think maybe we can do it afterwards. I'm certainly willing to hang around for a while, etc. But I would like to move along as well, and I think that we can agree to disagree on some matters. It doesn't end the world. Yes, go ahead, and then.
It's the Kimberley process system. It's a tripartite system. It's governments, industry, and the coalition of NGOs that have to allow the system to proceed and then make the ultimate decision.
Okay.
No.
Well, excuse me. It is just the governments. The NGOs and the trade are simply observers. No right to vote or make any decisions. But like I said, excuse me?
The tripartite nature of the Kimberley process allows the observers to vote, but the voting system within the Kimberley process is a consensus system, so there is no majority wins. Do we like the consensus system? The answer is not particularly, and we are trying to change it. It's an evolutionary process that we are beginning in Israel in a few weeks. It is not true that the NGOs and the industry don't get to vote. That's just not true. I
disagree with you about that, but let's go onwards. We're going to disagree a lot, but on that specific point, I do disagree with you. Okay, anyways, let's move along. We are fortunate to have here a good bit of news relating to fair trade gold certification, which is a process that took many years of tremendously good work, and I hope with God's help that we'll also come with such good news about the diamond industry at some stage. And so there's been a great movement here about the creation of fair trade gold certification and standards, and soon jewelers will be able to get fair trade wedding bands and do wonderful things. So could we please hear about this from Toby and Maya? Tell us all the good stuff that's happening out there.
Great.
Yes. So we're going to actually take you through some slides just to give you a foundation for the process and what we're working on, and at what point we can hopefully bring it to the U.S. market and globally to companies.
And if there is something that's a question that's sparked that's urgent during the slides, with your permission,
sure,
please feel free to shout out if we don't hear you, if you have a question, something that's not clear that you would like a deeper relationship to that aspect.
I'm just opening the PowerPoint here so we can see it as well. So just to begin, we're going to talk a little bit about what fair trade is and what Fairmind is and who the agencies that have been doing this work are. Okay, so what is fair trade and Fairmind Gold? One second. So basically the project is, it's gold sourced from artisanal and small-scale mining organizations that meet the fair trade standards which we've set up, and we being ARM and Fair Trade Certification Agency. And so the basic foundation of this certification is that it ensures miners receive a minimum price and a social premium, which we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, and assist the communities in developing social, environmental, and economic improvements. So fair trade certification, you've probably seen, you want to do this one? And I'll do this one. In terms of fair trade certification, you've probably seen that logo, one of those labels on things like coffee, tea, bananas, a variety of products. And basically what we do is it's a market-based approach to alleviating poverty, right? So we have supported farmers around the world. We only work in the developing South, 58 countries around the world. And we are an organization of networks in the developed world, so in Europe and the US. And we align buyers in America and in Europe with suppliers from the global South to ensure that they've been paid fair prices, have safe working conditions, and that the fair trade standards have been met. And then consumers can buy a product with that label on it, which ensures that, in fact, fair trade standards have been met.
So ARM's vision is for artisanal and small-scale mining, or ASM, to become a formalized, organized, profitable activity that uses efficient technologies, is socially and environmentally responsible, and that increasingly develops good governance, legality, participation, respect for diversity, generation of decent work, local development, poverty reduction, and social peace in our nations. This has been something that ARM was founded in 2004 and has been diligently at work on getting this. So this historic partnership between Flow and ARM is extraordinary, that the first fair trade, Fairmind Gold in the history of humankind is being rolled out. It's just extraordinary.
So the way that we came together on this project started back in 2006, and ARM was working on something called Standard Zero, which was really addressing the issues within the mining industry. And the value that something like fair trade has is not only do we know how to certify, but we have this label that consumers recognize. And so there was a real interest in collaborating our efforts, ARM having the expertise in the industry and fair trade having the expertise in the actual certification process and the label and marketing side of it, to come together and sort of form this excellent partnership to combine our efforts. So from 2006 to 2009, we've been developing the standards. We had over 1,000 stakeholders consulted. And finally in 2010, so through that time in 2009, we have been piloting the project with 9 mines. They're all in Latin America right now, in Colombia and Peru, Ecuador, and Bolivia. And we will be rolling that out to the rest of the world, so looking at Africa and Asia in the upcoming years. So 2010, the standards are now out, they're open, and what we are doing now, particularly it's being sort of steered in terms of a market in the UK, but in the United States we're ready to start talking to industry. And so that's really where the rubber meets the road with these kind of certifications, is that you have to have industry that says, okay, yes, we want to participate, we want to source fair trade product, we'll put the label on it, and how do we help create sustainable fair trade supply chains around gold.
This map demonstrates the density of mining, small-scale and artisanal mining around the world, with the darker colors indicating the higher density of populations of miners, as you see, mostly located in the south.
So these are the sort of the core tenets of why we're working in the industry in terms of fair trade and Fairmind. And so just to be very clear, this label is strictly starting with and aim to target small-scale producers, so artisanal miners working in the sector. The goal is to increase their access to market and to do so in a market dominated by unscrupulous traders. So we'll say that sort of kindly and correctly. But as we all know, there's a lot of issues within the industry, and so we want to help create more transparent and shorter supply chains. So on a very basic level, to start getting producers to improve their practices and then over time their standards and progress requirements, so that we can always, as a industry and within on the ground, be helping farmers to elevate and to grow and to progress. We know through all the fair trade certification on other products that we've done that really what happens here is that there's long-term partnerships that are set up, and so if you have a more direct connection to the people who are actually providing you the product and the gold, those long-term relationships are essential for the miners or for the farmers, and certainly for the industry. And then another piece of this model, which is interesting, is that there's a pre-financing piece to it. So once trusting and long-term relationships have been set up, oftentimes we see that industry then can help fund the miners to develop better technology and to access the kind of product that the industry is looking for. And then, you know, at the core of any kind of fair trade certification is this idea that the farmers will receive a fair price. Sorry, the miners. We're still getting the lingo down in this new one. Yeah. That, you know, minimum prices and premiums are a benefit. And so when we say that, just to give you an idea, and we'll talk a bit more about it, but there's something called a social premium that we use in fair trade, and that means that a percentage of the price of the traded price. So let's say, you know, you sell this gold and there's a fixed price, an agreed price. 10% of that actually then is paid in addition back to the community. The artisan of the miners have formed an organization. They receive that premium back and then as a group decide how to use the funds. And that's one of the most powerful and unique pieces about fair trade, and we've seen over all the industries we've worked with, those are the decisions that are made in communities for things like healthcare and schools and better living conditions. For some people it's literally like a roof on your home.
Social impact.
Yeah, social impact. Yeah.
And then also, as part of this, there is a 5% ecological premium paid. So basically, they're paid a minimum of 95% of the London bullion market fix, and 10% the social premium. And on top of that, 5% more is paid when the standards are being met for ecological, responsible, chemical, either free or responsible chemical use in mining. So it's a big advantage for the miners to get that extra 5% as well, and the communities.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a lot of money.
Any questions so far?
And are you saying there's two different standards? Then there's a regular 10% deal, and then there's the extra 5% deal. If in fact it's not only fair mine, but it's also no chemicals in the mining process.
Right. Well, not only no
two kinds.
chemicals. Exactly. There's two tiers of that. So if the community development, if the organization is in place, they are meeting the standards, both the current standards and the expanded standards that are expected to go along with this, then they get a 10% premium above that 95% price, minimum 95% price. Then also that extra 5% is meeting the standards for the ecologically responsible mining that's being done, with also improved standards built into that.
With gold at, what is it, 1,220? Like that. It's quite a bit of money. I mean, is that sustainable in terms of the price that people can get when they sell the jewelry?
It is. I just started carrying Oro Verde gold in our operation as an offering. So not in all of our pieces, but in the bridal line that we've launched, we are offering our customers the opportunity to participate in basically, we can't call it certified because it's not yet here, but we can say that it's fair trade, and we can say it's fair mined, and then there is right now that 15% premium that we're paying. We add that 15% into our price. We just build whatever our price is, we pass that plus the 15% along to the retailer, whom we ask them that they not increase that 5% or 15%. They keep that intact. And so it's small. It ends up being a very small percentage that a customer has to pay, where they can feel totally great about being part of this innovative, this development, this historic event where fair trade gold is now available.
And it sells.
Yeah, totally. People are so excited about it.
So.
Yeah.
It still is. It really still is. So part of this, that fair trade, fair mine certified gold is being rolled out initially in the UK. They have been really the strongest environmental and social leaders in the jewelry field, and so it's being introduced there. But and then there's the quantities. Right now, we don't have any certified mines available. They are in the process of becoming certified, and it looks like there are a number of those mines in South America that should be certified this year. Part of the development funds will be going to increasing other mines being certified. So right now, my understanding is, on the average, about 30 kilos a year from the mine. So 300 kilos from these 9 pilot mines that are happening around South America. That hopefully that will increase, and hopefully I think it's estimated in the next 15 years that we will move to somewhere around 15% of of the gold being sold will be fair trade, fair mined.
An interesting thing about fair trade when you look at supply and demand is that once we have producer groups that go through the certification and they become a part of the project, we have to have a market for them. So we, part of the science of what we do is to really always be carefully gauging supply and demand. So starting off with this more limited supply, we're actually comfortable with, because we want to make sure that it does well in the market, that we have industry that's interested, and as that grows, we're very much tracking it so we can then have other producer groups in the pipeline. Particularly, we'd like to expand it. It's only in Latin America. We'd like to look into Asia and Africa as well.
Can you talk a little bit about the chemicals that are that it covers?
Yes. Basically, mercury and cyanide. Mercury is the most damaging. Mercury, irresponsibly used, gets into the streams, gets into the air, and it never goes away. And that can be done. Eric, did you have a correction on that? Okay, great. And so that's really the big problem. There is a possibility for, as an interim, where I should back up a little bit. When there's no mercury or no chemicals involved, there's a much lower percentage of the gold can be extracted. You're losing a lot more. So that's where the ecological premium comes in. We know they're losing metal by not doing that, but they would prefer to keep it clean and get the price, right? But the use of chemicals, if it's done responsibly, that can be done without having either mercury or cyanide getting into the environment, and it's possible to do it relatively cleanly. With our intention ARM's intention is to eliminate virtually the use of chemicals in the mining process. Did I answer that question? Okay, great.
Let's go.
Okay, good. So some other aspects of the standard. Really important, the miners have to be formalized and organized. So, of course, you have small people, whether they're dispersed along big geographic areas. A core tenet of fair trade is getting people organized, because when they come together in a cooperative or a collective, they have more bargaining power, they have more buying power, they can get tools and the things they need collectively as a group. That's a core tenet of this project. The other big thing that we know about mining is that oftentimes on the ground there can be issues between farmers, agriculture, and miners, because they're sort of at odds, right? You have farmers who are stewards of the land and wanting to nurture the land in a different way, perhaps, than miners are interacting with the land. So a big piece of this standard being in place is that there's a formal way that a mechanism for grievances amongst local communities to ensure that mining is happening in a way that's well integrated, or at least accepted by the local community. Ensures payment of all taxes and royalties, so basically ensuring that these are regulated, the process is regulated, what's coming out of the ground and being sold is regulated within the government structure. And as Toby talked about, responsible management of the toxic substances and the specific criteria for ecological gold. Not supporting illegal activity or armed conflict. And there's very strict health and safety requirements that are built into the standard, and those are available for public viewing, and we will give you access to how to find that. Absolutely no child labor, special focus on rights for women minors, and then, basically the idea that this is traceable products. So it's gold that's traceable from the mine through to the piece of jewelry that it's in. Okay, so just to finish up, what do you do? So if you're a jeweler, if you're in industry and you want to be a part of this system, how do you source it? So as Toby pointed out, in 2011, the first product will be on the market in the UK. In the US, we are at the point now where we're sort of opening our doors to talking to industry, to trying to understand who wants to be a part of it. So if you're here and you want to, I encourage you to come have a chat with me, to tell people about this, and to see what we can start building as a group. And very honestly, based on what kind of demand we have, that's probably the amount of resources that we're going to devote to it. So if we see that this is something that the industry is interested in, we will certainly heed that call and help to ensure that we can source and certify fair trade gold for the U.S. market. And once you register with us and we are ready to do that, then you have to have a sourcing plan, ensure that you're complying with all the standards, and then, as we talked about, the minimum prices, so paying 95%, a minimum of the London Bullion Market Association fixed price, the additional 10% premium, and if it's ecological, it'll be 15% because you have the extra 5%. Pre-financing once you've established your relationships, and then just be a part of our traceability system. So everybody who's in the system does report what you've bought and sold, and that's really how we have the fair trade guarantee at the end of the day. I have business cards, but also my information will be up on the screen at the end, yeah. So it's for all sorts of products. Maybe you can mention that to everybody.
Well, I think, and I'm not really clear on this, the products exactly, but it's mentioned here: jewelry, commemorative coins, ingots, medals, trophies, religious objects, all can be certified. Yes. And I'm guessing that there could be more.
Yeah.
You probably haven't gone through all your presentations, so maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but have you thought about how to integrate recycled gold into this system?
It's really a separate matter.
It's what?
It's really a separate matter. Recycled gold, reclaimed, if you will. This is fair trade, fair mind is only going to be given that designation from artisanal and small-scale mining. It's really for the enhancement of those communities. Those people that have those communities, the 100 million people approximately around the world that are associated with small-scale and artisanal mining that have been marginalized and dismissed. So it's really time to bring them into it. They're just separate.
In theory, a store, for example, could have some products made of fair trade gold,
both,
and other products made of recycled gold,
exactly,
and other products made of brand new gold, that is not fair trade.
Yeah,
but
they could. I mean, the thing for us is that there's really no way that we could even fold any kind of recycled material into this program because we have no idea where it came from. And really the idea with any fair trade product, if you see that label, we are guaranteeing from crop to cup, we say with coffee, or from mine to band, metal. We have to find something fun for this industry. But that in fact it is. So. But I know some of the industry that I've been talking to have been certainly bringing that up as a valid point in question. And that leads us to sort of the final piece here, which is to be clear around, not every single piece of jewelry or object that will contain fair trade gold will be 100% gold, right? So we have a composite product policy. And so basically the golden rule here is that whatever gold, let's say you're making a band, whatever gold you use absolutely must be fair trade certified, but the other alloy metals, won't be. And again, it's something that we need to look at in terms of a wedding band. If there's a stone in there, and it speaks to what we talked about last session here, that won't be fair trade certified yet, but I think it's something that we'd like to see in the future. But we wanted to make this accessible, so we're starting with what we have and being practical as well. Do we have questions?
Just before you go, I'd just like to ask, traceability. We would love to learn more about what the diamond or the jewelry industry could do about that. And how does the traceability work? I see that if you have a piece of jewelry and it has other components, it's okay. So that's the complexity of issues. But how do you trace it back to the mine when some of these refiners, they refine like tons of, talk to us about traceability.
Right. So right now, what's being done, this is as far as I know, and as I mentioned, I'm just recently on the board and not so deeply affiliated with all of the past conversations that have happened. But for example, Oro Verde in Colombia, they have their own refining operation in Colombia. And so they know what goes in, they know what comes out, they monitor the weights of it, and from there they know exactly who it goes to, who it's shipped to. There's a certificate that comes with it, and when we take that gold and turn it into a jewelry product, sell it to a customer, along with that piece of jewelry comes a certificate from Oro Verde that they can actually trace back soon. They're working on the website connections, but be able to actually meet the specific the miners in that specific community from which that gold came. They know where it came from. It's quite phenomenal.
Is there any assistance?
I think there's two kind of certification systems. You've got your Fair Mine, which is telling you about the standards, and you've got your Fair Labelling Organisation, which is telling you that it came from the place that practiced those standards. What you have here is a combination.
Is there any marketing assistance that comes with this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole thing behind a consumer-based movement, is that when you have a label that people recognize, that's the core work that we do. Is we're out there, whether it's Twittering and Facebooking or leveraging our relationship with Starbucks to tell the story around fair trade. That's really what we're doing. We're trying to create enough awareness that people know about the issues and they know that there's a solution and that they are empowered as consumers to make a choice with their dollars.
Any question?
I guess we're on here. I understand ARM, and it was set up as a artisanal mining group, so I understand that. But maybe Flo can answer this a little bit more. I'm always concerned when major corporations don't give small producers a seat at the table. I'm also concerned when small groups don't give big corporations a seat at the table. My question would be, I believe Flo is the one that certifies chocolate, is that correct? Yeah. And that's mostly major corporations, Nestle's and Hershey's and groups like that. So the question is, I know ARM was specifically focused to small-scale miners. Is Flo doing something that will look at this in a broader context, or is it only focused on small-scale producers?
It's mainly focused for small scale. That's something that certainly does evolve, and it really depends on the category. In coffee, we only work with small producers around the world right now. In something like tea, we work both with small producers and with plantations. So it's really suited to the category, and it's about getting everyone around the table and understanding how the world market supply actually is traded, and if there's relevance for fair trade participation. So in things like bananas and tea, we very much feel like plantations, hired labor, there's a huge benefit there for those communities of workers, and we stand behind that 100%. The particular issues around gold, from what I understand, really we'd like to focus and be on the same page with ARM around doing it for small scale.
Okay, since I have the microphone, I'll use it one more time here. My concern with that is there are some major producers that I am not at all pleased with the way they're producing. There's some that are doing an exemplary job. And I would hate to exclude those from that sort of recognition because you're focused just on small-scale producers. So I would prefer to see the sort of system that was applied to chocolate. So now quit talking.
Gary,
Thanks. I'm concerned how you're going to stop these small artisanal miners buying up all the scrap jewellery in their local community, melting it down and mixing it in with their gold, so they get a 15% premium. How on earth are you going to stop that?
I think fundamentally it's a valid question, and yet the reality in the mining communities in which the gold is being mined, they can't buy gold. They are struggling to make it. And
sure, they'll find financiers.
True. That's possible, yes. And I think what we've seen so far is that the communities really are interested in community development. They're interested in doing things in a way that enhances their community, their mining ability, the environment in which they live. So while it's possible, at the same time there's another check at when they go to sell their gold, it's better to look like Oro Verde or whatever mine it came from as characteristic of that gold.
That's easily arranged with gold.
You with me?
That is easily arranged with gold. And the problem that I see is that your organisation could easily lose its entire reputation through messing around with something that is as valuable as gold.
It's not likely.
I might be able to help there a little bit. So I've known from the outset. So one of the systems, it's not just a kind of bunch of communities out there digging and selling their gold. Each of the pilot studies, each of the pilot projects which are to be certified have also an accompanying NGO who is essentially building their capacity, and they have an audit as well. So to be a cooperative, this is a system at the moment, they have an organised group that has to comply to certain kind of rules, and like any other system, they are, audited or verified. So is that 100% guarantee? Of course not, but what is? But it's not just, anybody can claim to be in fair mine gold. I don't know if that helps you at all.
Yeah, I've seen the stuff from Oro Verde, and they actually have people out there with them, checking them, auditing them, watching how much they mine. They know how many miners they are. They know what the yield and production is. So, and they've also a lot of experience with coffee. Coffee beans can also be, moved around. So I think that fair trade's got a pretty good name and reputation. And,
there are lots of mines around the world where the miners are able to steal the gold from their employers. And that's been going on for centuries, for thousands of years. So what's to stop people from bringing gold in if it's a cooperative?
Again,
lots of them, and lots of them bringing lots of gold in.
Yeah, I'm just saying to you again that if you have 100 panners, and a panner produces X amount of gold per day for the last so and so many years, and they show up with twice that amount or 20% more or something, it's going to stick out. So I think that you've got auditing techniques that you can use based on the number of people in your cooperative, the area they're working in, the history of the production from that area, the yield of the gold, how much it works, where it works, etc., that they could probably do a pretty good job with this. But your point's well taken, and I'm sure the Fair Trade Labeling Organization has spent how many years? 5 years, 6 years protecting your reputation on this?
Yeah, we've been doing fair trade for 25 years, actually.
So I guess some suckers out there will buy it anyways.
Yeah, and there's not only, as you mentioned, there's external control, so we have an audit that's happening annually, but there's a really complex, rigid internal control system that's happening there as well. So like, as you're pointing out.
What about other things like rubies, sapphires, silver? Is it the intention for maybe Float to move along and then start looking at other components that would go into jewelry?
Well, as you know, we did a study on diamonds. You know about that, Martin?
Unfortunately, yes.
So I think there's an interest. There's an interest, and it's we're NGO certification, so it's based on funding, and when there's grants there, and if there's interest, there's certainly ability to progress, and I think that'll happen. Gold is a nice entree, I think, into this sector.
Questions anyway, because we want to move along to ethical sourcing, which is like fair trade, but it's less extreme if I'm not. And I'll make sure you introduce yourself as well in a minute if you didn't. And so we've got this world of fair trade, and then we're going to talk about ethical sourcing, which is not exactly fair trade, but it's sort of on the way, some intermediate stage of betterment or community involvement. But any more questions about fair trade? I would just like to, please, go ahead, yeah, down there. Get him a mic, somebody.
And just in the meantime, thank you guys all so much, and certainly I'll be here after the session, and I would love to hear from you, and my contact information is up there, because now it really is time for us to hear back from industry and to build this, if there's an interest, into 2011 and beyond.
Please.
Could you elaborate briefly on getting gold into the jewelry? You mentioned you were going to make the piece. Did I misinterpret that?
I think perhaps. Yeah. Do you want to maybe ask the question in a different way? I can.
We don't understand you.
Taking the gold out of the ground and turning the bullion into a piece of jewelry, a ring, or so on and so forth. What is the certification steps for that?
Right. So fundamentally, every link in the supply chain is registered and reporting, right? So that's the fundamental basis of fair trade certification. It's an audit from the ground to the finished good. So, the miners are organized, they're tracking everything that they're pulling out, all the sales and the bills of lading are sent through, and everyone is auditing them. Once the product comes from the country of origin and comes to the United States, whoever receives the product and mutates it, changes it in any way, is certified with us. The person who receives it from them is also certified. They're reporting, I bought X amount of gold, I sold X amount of gold. The person who buys that is also doing the same thing up to the finished good, and the label is affixed inside.
All right.
We do. We do the audits. We are. Mm-hmm. And the marketing arm for sort of telling the story. Flow, the agency that's sort of our parent organization, there's two. So they've been separated for legal reasons. So the certification Flow Cert is a separate organization, and Flow EV, or nonprofit, is the marketing producer support function. They are separate, yes. That's right.
Thank you. This has been fantastic. I'd like to move along, but I also want to point out one thing. This is a new product category, everybody. Imagine we came to you and said, there's a new tennis bracelet concept coming. And we said, wow, tennis bracelets are Forever Mark, or what was it, the past, the present, the future. Now, what I think is going to happen here is that we're going to have development competition. If one store has fair trade and another store doesn't, the store that doesn't is going to be at a competitive disadvantage in their market space. So what I predict is that there's going to be a tremendous amount of demand for this product, because there are, at least not maybe in China, maybe not in certain other countries, but you don't need a lot of it. 15% is a lot of business right there. So what I think people should be aware of in the jewelry industry, that irrespective of how they feel about social justice and all that stuff, this is a product that if you don't have in your store, you're going to lose customers. And so we're going to see, I think, socially conscious competition driven purely for economic reasons, nothing to do with any sense of what's right and wrong, but stores that don't have this will be at a competitive disadvantage relative to consumers. Also, the fact that it's certified is going to reduce the amount of uncertainty and fuzziness that we're starting to see about charity jewelry and, all kinds of other things, because this is like the real thing, and Flow is the real thing. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity. I'm delighted that Flow has taken the jump into gold. I pray that they will then come into diamonds, or maybe other areas easier than diamonds originally. And also I think that for the jewelry industry, it's a wonderful opportunity to have a exciting new product, new story to sell. So I think people should be very excited about this thing, because it's just a wonderful product. I think we're ready to. Someone else has got anything, has questions in here? I think we're ready to move on to the ethical sourcing challenges and opportunities. Ashton, tell us a little bit about PACT and yourself. And you have this wonderful accent, and I think we'd like to hear it.
Yes. Even though I've lived in the United States for 10 years, I'm not sure I'm fully assimilated. Yes, so I apologize for missing the introduction. One thing I call I stupidly forget to pack when I came to JCK was my compass. I didn't realize it was going to be over 10 acres of Las Vegas, so I did rather lose my way getting here. So a brief background on me. I've been working in sustainable business strategies, and in particular mining and sustainable environmental economic issues for about 18 years, and about 10 years of those working in the NGO community, currently at PAC, before that at Conservation International. So I bring a little bit of that perspective from that ecosystem. And talking about ecosystem, Martin's absolutely right. There are many different parts in this ecosystem to make the industry more sustainable, more ethical, and he's right to hold many of those different actors to account. I challenge him a little bit in validating the efforts of some of those institutions which are all doing very good things, trying to move towards the same goal, but not necessarily walking together hand in hand just yet. My NGO in particular, PACT, we've been around for about 40 years. Essentially our goal is to work with poor communities in the developing world. Mining, we've been working for about 6-7 years now, mostly in Africa and Asia. We work with small-scale mining communities. We work with communities around large-scale mines. And as an organization, we've decided to work within the whole system as well. So we work with jewelers, and we work with investors, and we work with refiners, with the goal that what we need to do is align the industry to a common goal to do what we can to push for better practices and make sure that the potential of mining is released, and it's not just it's just not the perception that mining is only a negative impact, and what we must do is minimize that, and also positive aspects of it as well. So one of the things I picked up when Martin was talking, we were talking about what is the solution to the problem. Now the solution of course depends on how you frame the problem, and for us the problem is how do you ensure that people in the developing world who are poor have a dignified life and have access to markets, have a livelihood, and don't have degraded ecosystems on which to rely. So that is the goal there. The problem which I've been heard expressed here is how does the market protect itself against bad reputation. I would suggest that the way they do that is by seeing what they can do to ensure that the people in poor countries affected by mining live a better life than they do now. So my experience has been working with small-scale miners, been working with large-scale miners, but also working with jewelers. And I'm going to draw on some of the experiences today to talk about ethical sourcing. And a little bit before I go into the case studies examples, I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by ethical sourcing. And of course, ethics is just a kind of a framework for understanding. So what is that framework we should be looking at to understand what our responsibilities are? And for jewelers, I guess it kind of falls into three areas. It's, what is your sourcing policy for the materials you use? How do you operate your business, work with your employees, and so on? And how do you treat your consumers? And really what we're concerned with today is on the sourcing side. So looking again from the NGO perspective and say how do we move this whole system to become more sustainable, and looking at the sourcing, there's really, this might be a bit simplistic, but there seem to be three main areas of, three main sources. One is directly and recently from a mine. Another one is recycled or reclaimed scrap or returns stones. And in the case of gold, a small proportion which is released from central banks. So from the perspective of ethical sourcing, I think the first step is to understand what is your policy for each one of those sources. They are sources, and the point I want to make here is that whether they come from a mine or whether they come from a recycled source or whether they come from a central vault of a central bank somewhere, they all need to be considered in terms of their responsibility and their ethics, if you want. So what then is the first thing that ethical jewelers should do, or to become more ethical? I think first thing is about this transparency. So doing what you can to get to know where the stuff you use in your pieces comes from. And so Mike Ray was talking about this. The first step is do what you can. Are you going to be able to know all of that straight off? Of course you're not. But become more educated about that is obviously the first step. It's not impossible, however, and I'll talk to how we've done that in a couple of cases later on. Second one is, once you know, or have got a good take on what you don't know, then setting some expectations or criteria for what responsible or ethical production means from those different sources, whether it's from a mine or whether it's from a recycled source. Now, of course, there are more than one standard, as we hear, and everybody would say, well, can't we just have one standard? And I guess the response to that is, well, don't you really want to think about what standard you think you should have to have integrity in your own business rather than rely on other people? And we'll talk a little bit more of that in the cases. And the third, which is a more of an emerging one, is the leadership stand. Now, not everybody can do this given their kind of competitive position in the market, but there are some jewelers now who are saying, yes, we want to protect our brand. Yes, we want to make sure that our consumers aren't associated with blood diamonds or dirty gold. But actually, we want to do more than that. It's not just about protecting our backside. What this is about is making a positive difference in the lives of people affected by mining. It's about unlocking the potential. So what can we do in our policies through our supply chain or through cause-related marketing, whatever it is, to show that actually we can have a positive impact as miners? And in this way, it's not relying so much on standards, important as they are, but more on a story which talks about the potential of sustainable development on the people and the environment that it's claiming to be sustainable for. So that's the kind of the ethical framework, if you want, for the jewelry industry. What then, as we're talking about sourcing, is the ethical framework for mining. Now, you wouldn't believe it if you Google mining and, say, couple that with the environment or community, that mining community is as varied as the jewelry community is as varied as the NGO community is. There's many different types of mining, and I'm sure that John and Mike would have different ways of categorizing that, whether it's by geographical spread or by commodity. The one which works for me when we're talking about this is really by size, and size is important because different size mines will employ different type of people, different type of technology, need different types of capital, have different expectations, different deposits, and so on. And we've heard, and I kind of simplistically break this down into three. We've heard there's these artisanal mining, which are, essentially they are less mechanized, very often informal, quite often they're illegal, but incredibly important, supplies something like 20% of the gold market, 95% of the colored gems market. Estimates about 100 million people depend on artisanal small-scale mining for their livelihoods. Then there's this kind of small to medium size, which are enterprises. So these have become companies, and they're often entrepreneurs. That category is quite large. It can go from what they call juniors down to somebody employing 20 people on a mine, more mechanized, more formal, different type of capital, venture capital quite often. And then there's a kind of a large-scale mining, the kind of the Rio Tintos, the Newmonts, the BHP Billiton, the ones you hear about most, where you can see very large holes from space and very complex economically, socially. So my point here is kind of laying those out as each one of those can be responsible or irresponsible, ethical or not ethical, regardless of whether it's a small-scale mine, artisanal mine, or a large-scale mine. And to understand this ecosystem, we've got to understand each one and what is responsible. And I think that what we're trying to move towards now is a better understanding. If you're a jeweler, if I get this piece of gold, does it come from a responsible source, regardless of whether it's small, medium, or large? And in your policy, you say, well, we think we need to be promoting the better conditions and better access to markets for small-scale miners, so that's going to be reflected in our strategy to do that. But that doesn't mean that we're saying that large-scale mining is inherently irresponsible, which it's not. Just a note on kind of recycled and ethical is one of the things I'm dealing with at the moment. We all know that most of the world's gold is above ground. Well, kind of. It's above ground, but it's actually underground in vaults. And when we're talking about recycled, it kind of brings up the idea that if you recycle things, then you're diverting it from the waste stream. And like paper, for example, if you recycle paper, that's not going to go to the landfill, and if it doesn't go to the landfill, that's less pressure on forests. But for gold, of course, it's not really the case. Everyone recycles gold and silver because it's very precious. So really, I think it's better to talk about available and unavailable gold to jewelleries. And in the available category of that, 2/3 of available gold comes from mines. Something like, I think, 15%, 20% from scrap, the rest from whatever the central banks decide to release. So when you're looking at available gold, it is about mining. When you're looking at recycled, it becomes another source. And then the question we need to ask, what is responsible recycling or re-refined or reclaimed gold? So that's the kind of the frame. So I'll quickly go through some of these examples. And the two I worked with, the two which I've come today, are two very different parts of the market. So I spent the last 5 years working with Walmart and Sam's Club, and more recently with Cartier, two equally committed jewelers and retailers trying to do the right thing, facing similar problems, but two very different segments of the market. You know, one attainable, one aspirational, uber luxury. So some of the needs they face were, you know, you probably recognize these. These are, I think, almost universal. They need to find something which is a brand fit. You know, something which works for Walmart isn't going to work for Cartier. Although, I can tell you some interesting conversations I've had between Walmart and Tiffany. And also, especially for people like Cartier, you know, they want something which doesn't dilute their brand strength. So, you know, when retail is, you know, you're just selling stuff, so it doesn't really matter. Cartier, that is their brand, that's what they're selling. Some of the other challenges as well, you know, supply. What are the actual business needs? Walmart has, you know, purportedly the biggest jeweler in the world, 3 to 5% of the market, a considerable amount of gold and silver, particularly. Standards and assurance. Which standards should they use? Traceability, how do you ensure the provenance of the material? And premium, you know, we talked about 10 to 15% of premium. Realistically, it's more like 20 to 25% once you take into the transaction costs of batching stuff through the system. So that's quite considerable. That might be able to absorb in the luxury end, not when you have finer margins like some of the retailers. So I'll quickly run through how we approach these, taking each one of those things. So for the supply with Walmart and Sam's, thinking about the brand fit and thinking about their business needs, what we did then was pair them with large-scale miners, Rio Tinto and Newmont, because you needed, for two reasons. One, really, if you're thinking about Walmart and what they can do, they are a mainstream large retailer. They have the opportunity to influence large-scale and mainstream and commercial mining. So that seems to be the appropriate thing to do. As well, it's straightforward business needs. If you need to have someone who's supplying Walmart and their suppliers, then you need to have some considerable amounts of gold. For Cartier, it is rather different. Cartier's brand is, from their perspective, as I understand it, is more artisanal, more craftsmanship. And so they want to be associated with a gold company which has similar types of characteristics. So for them, they were coupled with a gold mine in Honduras, which is a really interesting case study because it's 35% artisanal miners working with a commercial company. And that had a different feel to it. And so then moving on to the standards. So what standards should they use? So when we started with Walmart, the RJC hadn't completed its standards. And also, and in fact, Walmart hasn't, although it supports the RJC, I think I can safely say it's not a member of the RJC. But what it wanted to do was say, well, if we're going to take a stand and we're going to ask our suppliers to supply responsible jewelry, responsible gold and silver, then we've got to say what it is. So we worked for a few months with a small group of NGOs, with the industry, with their suppliers, and we came up with a criteria from Walmart's point of view, what is responsible mining? And if you compare those to the RJC, they're not as big as in scope. They're a little bit tougher in some areas, but equitable in others. For Cartier, they in fact use a kind of a first draft of the RJC standards. They are the founding or a founding member of the RJC anyway. But more important for them was the story that we were getting out of Gold Lake and Honduras. So we spent quite a lot of time looking at what were the measurable impacts that gold company was having on those communities and how we can report those as standards and impact outcome indicators. Transparency. With Walmart, that was quite fun because we did really the first fully traceable line of jewelry, Love Earth. And you know what we did there was pair up with a UK friend of mine who has a firm called Historic Futures, which has a tracking technology which basically uses a wiki-based software, which means that you get people in the chain to collaborate. So the Argyle mine in Australia would input data and that would go up on the wiki, and then you'd be able to see it from the supplier to the cutter, the polisher, the manufacturer, and then ultimately to the consumer. So basically the consumer can go onto the website, you can put in a batch number which is in the back of the piece of jewelry, and they can trace it in real time to where that, the different mines that piece of jewelry came from. For Cartier, it was a bit more straightforward because the mining company has a business model to basically control the whole value chain. So the mining company has its own little primary refining center in Honduras, but it also has a refinery in Italy. So they were able to refine to 3.5 nines in Italy before delivering to Cartier. So they can go, 95% up the value chain for that assurance. Lastly, branding. Walmart decided they want to have a separate line, Love Earth, so that would fit their kind of retail mantra. And they have achieved their goal, exceeded their goal of having 10% of their gold and silver coming from mines of known origin under that line, and I'll continue to expand. Cartier, as I said beforehand, Cartier's brand is Cartier, and so in terms of claiming, they don't claim that a piece. What they claim is that as a whole, they're able to tell where this, as a whole of the quantities that are taken of gold, a certain percentage comes from this mine in Honduras. So I hope that's a kind of a useful case study. I guess if I just leave you with just a few takeaways. First of all, being ethical for me, and from where I sit, means understanding your sources as best you can, being as transparent as you can, or at least open about what it is, where it is that they come from, and setting expectations for those sources, whether those refiners or whether they're mines, for their behavior and continued improvement of their best practices. Ethical sourcing does not mean all mining is bad or only small or community mining is good. They can be either. Or that just because it's recycled, that it somehow has an ethical good attached to it. There are emerging standards of different types of mining, RJC, ARM, even for this medium-scale mining juniors, there's the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada. Also, I think that we need some leaders in the industry. That's not going to be everybody, and to me, the Cartiers and the Tiffany's are doing a little bit of this, where they're kind of reaching out and going, let's put a spotlight on this kind of new paradigm mining like Gold Lake, why this is different, and let's make an effort. That is also a valid thing to do. To be strategic and be sustainable, your sourcing strategy is going to have to fit your brand. You've got to be able to generate value from this. And it's also, there's a learning component here. I understand Martin's excitement about keeping people accountable to their claims, but on the other hand, I think we're all learning here. So we have to kind of go, this is the best I can do right now. Now let's reflect and see how we can do it better. If we keep on putting barriers up in front of people and say that is not good enough, you said this, which actually I think is a criticism which could be leveled at NGOs, then it scares people off and it's not going to help. That doesn't mean, however, that we don't push hard and continue to be impatient about things that aren't, things that are in the imbalance. And I'll leave it there.
Wow, thank you. So what we're getting here is that there's fair trade, and then there's ethical sourcing. And ethical sourcing is like the intermediate level of making sure that you're in a process of doing things optimally. And you've got Walmart and Cartier and top companies looking at this. The question is, when I talked to some people, they were afraid to put stuff in because they felt it would damage their other goods of their showcase. Anybody experience that? Is that a concern that the trade may not want to do ethical sourcing because they're afraid that other products that they have would get diminished somehow?
Well, I think I alluded to that a little bit, and yes, I guess there's a difference between a retailer, which just stocks stuff on shelves and sells them, and they do want to have different lines because that's how they get segmentation and market share. And then there's the jewelers, the Cartiers, the Tiffany's, many others, and of course they don't want to kind of draw attention that 5% of their jewelry line is perfect when the 95% is not. But that goes, my point is that, when you're claiming, you don't necessarily have to claim per piece. You don't have to say this ring is fair trade. You can say that, in our comprehensive strategy to be a responsible jeweler, we are doing several different things. One, we're members of a business association which is doing this. Two, we are, through our sourcing, we are, sourcing from a small-scale miner. 3, we have these policies in place, and so on and so forth. So I don't think I don't think the expectation should be that every single thing has to be labelled in your shop. That's unrealistic at the moment. What I think we can expect is that, jewelers are thoughtful and put in place a comprehensive strategy for addressing what they can address.
Toby, you were going to say something?
Well, yes, it's been my experience in approaching retailers, first of all, with the matter of reclaimed gold and silver. That exact question comes up, well, how does this make everything else look bad? And I equate it to Toyota. They sell a Prius, right? Doesn't make the rest of their models bad. It's simply an offering. But I think the most important thing is that you're talking about leadership, Ashton, that the jewelers, the retailers be proactive in taking a stand for a future that inspires us all. We've got to start somewhere, or we're going to end up being way behind on this curve. So yes, it's a difficult conversation. It's not something that falls naturally out of our mouth. There's always the concern for comparison and good, bad, better, worse, all of that. This is not a case of that. It's simply saying, this is the direction that we are going. This brand is doing it in this way, this brand is doing it in the other way, and we are committed to bringing every brand along. But it so elevates their stature to begin and take that stand.
Is there a limit to this ethical sourcing? Like you mentioned cause-related marketing, or you give a couple dollars to the World Wildlife Foundation, and then you say I give $10 there, so my $1 million of jewelry is greater. Are there any limits? I know that Flow's got very strict guidelines, but in this ethical sourcing, and is the phrase ethical a good phrase? I mean,
I've never found a good phrase, to tell you the truth. Someone's always going to take a shot at it, whatever, because it comes down to claims.
What are your limits?
Well, I mean, I suppose I'll answer that in two ways. I mean, I think what you should start off with is a comprehensive strategy. So that strategy should hit, several different things. First of all, you've got to get your house in order. Am I a responsible, jeweler? Am I treating my people right? Am I doing the right things in my accounting system? Then you can start to look outside to other stakeholders and the other people in your business environment. One of those, of course, is your sourcing. Where do you get these sources from? What should I be asking them to do? What can I do with them together? So that could be, I don't like the way you're mining, if you can get down as far as that, or I don't like the way you're refining. So, one of the conversations I had recently with a refiner was, where do you know, out of all your sources, do you know if you get gold or silver from e-farms, electronic farms in Africa? He said, well, we know we don't because we only take, post-consumer jewelry. So, is that something that, a position you want to take, because that is an issue you're particularly concerned with? But then you could also do things with your suppliers, say, well, look, there's only so much we can do, but why don't we put together a cause-related marketing campaign? So I'm working on this as well, that, you can get the miner, the retailer, and some of the suppliers involved in a campaign which can give back. That's a good thing to do, as long as it's a part of a broader strategy. If you are, if you're only doing a cause-related marketing thing, then of course you're going to get criticism leveled of greenwashing and so on. And then another thing you look at is your consumers. Jewelry is a kind of an aspirational purchase. What are your jewelers 10 years, 15 years down the line going to be thinking about? What attributes are they going to want to see in their jewelry? What attributes are they seeing in other categories? When I'm speaking to luxury brands, I say, well, from where you're looking now, yes, you might be looking at other jewelers, but should you not be looking at luxury vacations, luxury cars, other luxury experiences, and see what they're doing, and then imagine, because they're the same customers, then imagine what your customers and your consumers might be asking of you in 10 years' time.
Would RJC consider tiers of what they're doing? Because RJC sets a standard, but maybe there could be a little higher tier for ethical or something like that?
We haven't gone down that road, and not many certification systems do in that sense, in that there isn't a halfway house for fair trade. There isn't a halfway house, 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars, 4 stars. What we're talking about with our system is, do our members conform with the standard as attested by an independent auditor? In terms of what is being discussed around the question of ethical sourcing, as Ashton's just described, There it is, what is the nature of the claim? And then there is an enormous opportunity for people, depending upon how far down the track they have gone, both in terms of what they know about their suppliers and their suppliers and their suppliers and their suppliers. So at one level, we're looking at within our chain of custody standards work is so to make sure that the claim that is being made, whatever it is credible, is justifiable. It isn't just something grabbed out of the air that, you know, I bought it from a brother-in-law, so it's fine. It might be, but then again, it might not. So I think Ashton's got it right. It's a question of, for the entire industry, whether you're a member of RJC or any of the other trade associations, is looking at your sourcing policy. Just who is it you're buying from and why? Who are those people? Because exactly as Ashton has said, there are good and bad operators at every point in that supply chain. It isn't that any one group has a monopoly on virtue or ethics or however else you want to describe it. You can have appallingly bad small operators and appallingly bad big operators, fantastic small operators, fantastic big operators. Your responsibility, quite frankly, at a business level, is to find those fantastic people, be fantastic yourself, and get that development going with your customers so that you are recognised for that virtuous circle you've created with your supply chain. They're the real challenges, I think, for the industry, and one that I think the industry is well positioned to take advantage of. Very few industries that compete with jewellery for discretionary expenditure are anything near as well developed. Notwithstanding you're hearing here today about, well, we're beginning, at least we've started. And in many instances, we've come quite a long way. If you look at cars, you know, regardless of whichever make, the notion of where did it come from, how was it made, what was it done? One of the biggest competitors for the jewellery trade is for obviously advanced electronics. A notable and popular electronics producer has been dragged through the fence backwards over labour standards around the production of their product. You know, we're not unique in facing these sorts of issues, but I think this industry, to give it its credit, has done an enormous amount of work thus far, at small scale, at large scale. What we need to do is make sure we stick at it, drive through and deliver that very credible story to our consumers.
Thank you. I think that's great. Okay, anybody have any questions, issues? Yeah?
Yeah, I have a question for Ashton. When Walmart announced their Love Earth line, they had a conference call that had a significant number of NGOs and some other people on it, of which I was listening, I guess participating. And there were a number of NGOs that beat up Walmart pretty significantly because a number of the mines that they mentioned on their website, with the indication that this was very green, many of them, particularly some in Arizona, were under significant sanctions by the U.S. government for their environmental policies. And I don't normally stand up for Walmart, but I said, look, Walmart has been the first one here as a major to try and develop a transparent supply chain. I said, the question is, a year from now or 2 years from now, will Walmart also put their efforts behind going to their suppliers and saying, what are you doing about those mines and what efforts are you taking to solve those problems? Can you tell me if any of that has happened? Has Walmart put their financial muscle behind that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think the point I think you're making is very good. And you know, the story of Walmart, it took, you know, 5 years to get into that position, or maybe 4 years to get in that position of actually kind of taking that stand. From people who really didn't know very much about the industry beyond their suppliers at all. So it was, in fact, a step in the dark and a leap of faith, you know, a leadership stand. And yes, of course, they got attention by NGOs, some for good reason, that their communication, going back to their claims, could have been better on some of their website, which they heard and then went back and addressed. Of course, because some NGOs saw that it was entering into their territory, that there was, ethical mining can only be one thing, which is small-scale mining and boutique jewelers. That is not a view I take. Have so what they have, so another point where you're absolutely right is that because they were transparent about who they were sourcing from, which includes, I should say John's company as well, and because they were transparent about what the standards were that they were expecting, that enabled them to have conversations with those companies about those complaints and about those standards. So all I can say is that I know they've had those conversations, and they are continuing now to raise expectations with other suppliers as well. To the specifics, what they're able to do, I don't know. John might know, as he was one of the suppliers.
Well, I mean, I can tell you that we went through a very elaborate process to assure Walmart, if you like, that the mining processes that we use, and there were two Rio Tinto operations involved. One was the Argyle diamond mine in West Australia, and the other was Kennecott Utah Copper in Utah, in Salt Lake City. And the checklist of issues in the Walmart responsible mining document is quite extensive, and we essentially documented our adherence to every single one of them, and those documents were made available publicly. So if you were asking whether they held us accountable, I can assure you they did, and it was certainly nothing that we were afraid of at all. Of course, we were happy to do it because we thought it was a project absolutely worth doing, and not because we wanted to sell product. We would sell it anyway. We felt that it was really putting a stake in the ground about how you can track, if you like, in inverted commas, an ethical chain of production right the way through the system, and using Ashton's friend's software in the Historic Futures, which had been formerly used by some of the English supermarket chains to track all sorts of product, but it worked equally well for diamonds and gold. So it showed that it could be done, and there were a number of actors in that chain of supply, but it did prove that you could indeed track a stone from a mine to a ring, or a piece of gold from a mine to a ring, on a a fairly extensive scale, not a kind of little bespoke scale, but they had 300 stores involved and quite a lot of product. So I think it was absolutely worth doing.
That's the only thing I would add is that in the beginning of the discussions, when we're talking about what mine should they source from, many NGOs said, well, we've got to find the perfect mine, which is in the middle of a desert, no people nearby, and doesn't use any water. Well, there might be kind of one of those, but the point is that if you're a Walmart anyway, what you want to do is push the standards in the mainstream of the industry. And so I thought it was a purposeful decision not to go necessarily to these kind of picture-perfect mines, if they even exist, because especially if it's a legacy mine, there's always some dispute. If you're 150 years old, 100 years old, whatever the Kennecott, there's going to be some dispute there. If you're on a land which has Native American territories in it, there's going to be some dispute there. But the point is that, we can face up to those and we can have a discussion about those. We don't have to kind of hide it. And it's better in my mind at the stage we're at now to be transparent, open, and if the jewellery industry is able to play a part of that, then that's an excellent contribution.
Excellent. Questions anywhere? Are there any retailers here that could say how they feel about the opportunity? Susan, we can get you to, is there an opportunity in all this to do something, make more money doing it so it's sustainable rather than just a kind of short-term goodwill effort? Is this stuff sustainable?
I certainly think there's an opportunity. I think a lot of it is just, as has been discussed a lot today, doing the right thing and understanding that we're all humans on the same planet and that we all have a responsibility in the sector with which we live to ensure that everybody is benefiting from it. And I think that historically that hasn't been the case. I think there is a huge and dramatic shift and change in the consumer's mindset. And as the younger consumer, who is far more attuned to this than the baby boomers, become that much more demanding, it will in itself create a tremendous amount of the change that will need to happen. So, you know, we run what we consider to be a very ethical business. We always look at every decision we make to be the right decision. There is certainly a lot more opportunity, I think. I think we felt that our hands were somewhat tied because it was very difficult. We're a small retailer relative to these giants that you're discussing today. But there wasn't an opportunity for us. It wasn't happening, and I do thank the very large retailers who have taken it upon them as a mission, who have really moved it forward to the benefit of the rest of us that can now follow behind, because we don't have the resources to make the change that has been necessary. So I commend the Cartiers and the Walmarts and the Tiffany's of the world who will enable the independent jeweler, and there are many of us here at this trade show, to be able to do what we wish to do, hope to do, but don't necessarily have the resources that we are able to do.
Anybody else have any comments? Yeah.
And bringing these certificates to the customer and talking about confidence, where these are coming from. Each dealer has to go from the bottom saying this is not a conflict diamond. And the GIS was with, as a common jeweler and someone who has been confined in our product for all these years, they look towards me to be confident with my product. So when I hear that it's going to take 15 years before fair trade is going to really be able to make a big effect in the market, we support you 100%. Like I said, we don't have the resources to do these things. But I'm looking for that confidence still to tell my customer that there's a lot of great organizations in my trade that are working diligently every single day, and we're having meetings and discussions that are allowing you to be more confident in your purchase. And as a store owner, as a merchant, I'm doing everything I can do by being here to present this information to them. It's more demographics. I don't have anybody in my store who says to me, until Blood Diamonds came out, how's the mining from your gold? They don't say those things. The younger people are saying, are these blood diamonds, these conflict diamonds? So education is so important, so we look for the education from these leaders. So
I hope you've been visiting diamondfacts.org. Website diamondfacts.org. There's materials there for you to use to communicate with your consumers, to train your store managers and sales associates, and also to communicate with your own suppliers. And all of it downloadable. Steal it from diamondfacts.org. Take it all from there.
And just to clarify, so it's, I don't know, 15 years, maybe there was a misunderstanding. You could, right, so you can, there's going to be fair trade certified gold that you could purchase next year and have to work with. So we're ready, and we need people to help move the project forward. Yeah. In 15 years, we hope to be capturing a big portion of the market. That's what we were saying.
Can I just say briefly, a couple of people, Ashton and Susan and a couple of others, referred to the term sustainable development. I actually think that it's a very powerful way to think about the way that our industry contributes in so many ways to the various communities right around the world. And I think that that's something. It's a paradigm, if you like. It's a way of thinking about the way that we contribute and the way that we need the world to work more effectively around, I think, into the future. And I think we need to get better at telling those stories to consumers so that over time we reposition the way that our industry is perceived, because I think that we can position it as an industry that contributes profoundly to a more sustainable future in this world. And from my own experience in the mining industry, the things that occur in the hundreds of communities where our mines are around the world are quite astonishing, the way that they work together, and people are educated and housed and provided with healthcare and all of those sorts of things. It's not just a claim, it actually does happen. And you can say that in various ways, I think, about the different organisations right the way down the line. But I don't think we communicate that very effectively. So I'm not suggesting that we ought to spin a line. Far from it. We should always tell the truth. So we need to keep doing the work on the ground. But I think it's equally important that we communicate it so that consumers are aware about the very fine things that companies in this great jewellery industry do.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've run the course here. I want to thank everyone very much for coming. And you want to say something there? Please. That's fine, sure.
Everybody's ready to leave, that's fine. I know this was pretty much focused on gold and diamonds, and that's great. I'm very happy to hear what I hear in the directions that things are going. But could I have just a minute and you bear with me on a colored stone issue?
Sure.
I did a lot of work in China in reference to silicosis in the cutting of gemstones. Silicosis, obviously, is silica that you're breathing when you're doing it. And just for our industry, I think we need to look. NGOs are getting much more involved and some NGOs are very responsible ones that are trying to benefit things and make things better. I think they're all trying to make things better. It's just they have different ways of doing it sometimes. And if you have just a second, if I could read a couple of these titles of some of these reports that have been done in just the last few months. One's called Deadly Dust, the silicosis epidemic among Guangdong jewelry workers and the effects of China's occupational illness and prevention compensation system. It was done by the China Labor Bulletin. And they quote WHO in it as some of their statistics, that there are now 500,000 cases of silicosis in southern China, and that 24,000 people are dying a year from it. And then another one from the National Labor Committee, and this is the group that basically works on sweatshops, but some attention now is going to our industry. And again, I think the tone, I didn't write these reports, I'm not supporting them. I have tried to check them out as much as possible to see the accuracy, but I think maybe the tone is what worries me, and that if we come back with a positive direction, that will help us all. The tone, Heart of Darkness, workers in India, including children, will die from grinding gemstones for Valentine's Day. I think it gives you sort of the focus and direction that it's going, but I think a couple of their points mean a lot. More than 2,000 men, women, and children have died in India from silicosis that they have documented. Many workers are 12 to 13 years old. They're paid about 11 cents an hour. So I hope that this industry can, these products go in your gold. They're going to impact you for better or worse, whether you like it or not. And there are solutions to it. Both these NGOs have come to the industry and asked for help to try and find a positive way to do this so that we don't end up just unemploying a whole bunch of people in the process. So hopefully, we can look very broadly. I know, Martin, you have in the past in color as diamonds and everything else. So I support what you're talking about here. I really appreciate it. And any help that colored stones can get to would be great. Thank you.
Great. Eric, thank you very much. And I should point out Eric Brownworth's been one of the leaders of Fair Trade Gems and supports schools and all kinds of great activities across South America. He should really be well, he's on the panel here with us, but I think it's important that we relate to the jewelry industry as a whole, which is gold, which is diamonds. And what my takeaway from this also is that it is a process. As my rabbi used to say, he said, I don't care how religious you are, tell me if you're getting more religious or less religious. That's what he was interested in. So there is a takeaway here that we are all, in fact, good people trying to do good things, and that it's a process. It's not going to happen right away. Certain houses are on fire, though, and that might get some of us, like me, a little overexcited. But fundamentally, we're moving in the right direction. These conferences have been taking place for years. More and more people come, and then really, you guys made a big effort to come here. I want you to really appreciate that. And some of the people here are hearing it. I think there'll be good synergist even among the people sitting at the dais here. And I think that if we point ourselves in the right direction, and if we believe that we can do the right thing, and God helps us a little, I think that in fact the diamond industry a decade from now, or maybe much less than 15 years, we won't recognize it. Our awareness of the problems, our ability to, a desire to deal with them, is just becoming more and more mushrooming and blossoming. So I think that there is a positive takeaway. I think it's good for us to talk about these things honestly, put the problems on the table, get a little bit worked up, and that I'm very hopeful, and I think that the future is just going to be better because of all of our energies. And I want to thank you all for coming and participating, and thank the audience for being here and really sharing this wonderful day with us. So thank
Martin,
you all.
Just one thing also, sorry, not to take the applause away. There are a few ARM golden veins. These golden vein book is a background of, it's really a kind of a manual for the mining industry for small scale and artisanal mining. There are a number of copies around the room, so if you'd care to take one with you, please do. They're quite informative.
I also want to say something. Yeah, Ariel here is, like Pia was very enamored by the process. If you leave her your card, so make sure to contact you with anything that comes up. And I want to thank our good friends up there on the dais up there for doing such a great job with the audio visual today. Thank you all. We really appreciate your effort.
Thank you.